So today's guest is John Straw, and I've known John for at least 15 years. And what anyone listening can find out about John is that he's been the founder and CEO of a number of companies and has exited more than a few times. He's also an investor and has an excellent track record of success. And you'll be able to see on LinkedIn that McKinsey employed John to advise other CEOs. But what you won't know is about how much energy he has unless you meet him. His passion and enthusiasm often feel limitless. He's one of those people who, if he can't open a door to get to the person he needs to speak to, he smashes it down. Which, having worked with John, is a skill and a level of tenacity that I greatly admire. So, hello, John. How are you?
I'm bloody marvelous, Matt. How lovely to see you. That's something of an over description, I think it would be fair to say. I think with the McKinsey thing, which is one of the best I did, was McKinsey as senior advisor for 7 years. And it's probably the best thing I've actually done in my career. It was absolutely amazing. And I used to walk in the room and actually lower the average intelligence by about 25%. I mean, some of these people are just extraordinary individuals, and it was just been a real privilege working with them. And I've had the full spectrums, you know, so I've worked with corporates, I worked for corporates as a CDO, and, you know, I've done the startup thing and I've done the investment thing. So I've got a 360-degree view in my 65 years. So it's been a real privilege. I think it's, and I have been ferociously lucky during that period of time.
I don't think you've been lucky at all. And I think you've been very humble. So can you tell, oh, I know your path, but can you tell the people listening about your career path to becoming a CEO?
So I am a out of the womb born opportunist. And I'll give you a little bit of a path here. So I started my first company at the age of 20. I never set out to become a CEO. Let me absolutely clear about that. I am an entrepreneur. I never set out to be a CEO. I don't think I'd ever set out to be a CEO. I am not a natural manager. And I do think that there's a very big dividing line between the entrepreneur, the person who starts the business, versus the person who can successfully run the business. And I think that the Venn diagram between being a good manager and a good entrepreneur, I think, is a rarity. And I've met it I've got a couple of investments with people like that, and it's a real eye opener to actually meet practicality versus opportunism. So I started my first company when I was 27. This is 400 years ago, bringing computer parts in from the United States and reselling them, and it was really successful. And I ended up employing something like about 30 people, and the business got killed Black Wednesday back in 1992. When the exchange rates changed, and it just killed the business, and then it pushed me into personal bankruptcy as well. But that's from ashes rises phoenix, and you're always on the lookout. And I moved to the US, spent a bit of time with some startups over there, did some good work for them, and then came back to the UK, and I saw this new search engine opportunity, and it went. And I thought, gosh, this is a great way of actually businesses being able to actually reach consumers in a cost-effective manner. So I set up the business on the back of a whim, didn't raise any money, did it all from cash flow, which was, that is the stuff that nightmares are made of, but grew the business from naught in 2000 to exit value, some millions back in 2007. Employed some amazing people. Colette Easton was one of them. She's gone on to become chief exec of a business called Yard. I think you know her quite well as well. From LinkedIn days and nothing else. And I think that one of the first things is that, whilst I don't consider myself a particularly good manager because I don't have the eye for detail, what I am able to do is I am able to animate people around opportunities, and I surround myself with some really great people. You included, Matt, when we were doing LinkedIn, and I think that a really big part of it is I over delegate probably, but a really big part of it is to be able to actually surround yourself with good people. So as I say, and then I went on to form LinkedIn back in 2009 with you, and then actually, I got sacked by 13. So I never set out to be a CEO. I set out to be an opportunist. But there was one really big moment that I had, and that was I was sitting on tube platform in London back in 2005, and I sat there and I had this thing that came through my mind. I'm sitting there thinking, I am a tactical opportunist, right? I look for tactical opportunities, and that only gets you so far. And I realized that I didn't know anything about the big picture in order to look at strategic opportunities. And what I did is I went and bought myself a subscription to The Economist, which in those days was its black and white newspaper version. And I've read it religiously ever since. And it allowed me to put on a big picture hat and a strategic picture hat, and around the convergence of technology and economics and all those things. And that's one of the reasons I wrote that book on convergence of technology and economics back in 2014. So it was, if I'd have followed it through, I think that therefore I was on a transitional course from being a tactical opportunist to be much more strategic and therefore much more orientated towards becoming a CEO. And that's probably one of the reasons why McKinsey hired me, because I had that balance between big picture and tactical opportunism. And it was a really interesting picture for them to actually get me to go and talk to some of their clients about. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, and my experience of you have that rare quality of being a sales-orientated CEO as well.
Yeah.
You know how to do a deal. You are not put off by deals that look difficult or impossible.
No.
And people are infected by your enthusiasm for what you're selling at any one moment in time. And I've worked in buildings where your team have been around you, and people believe in you. I'm here because I believed in you.
Well, I think also the other thing, Matt, is actually you and I interacted very well, because I actually became the front man of the operation, then you delivered what I talked about. Which is, in many cases, was an interesting coincidence rather than necessarily a deliberate intent. But I'll tell you one thing. I've backed 13 businesses in the past 8 years, and I've had a fantastic return on my portfolio, a cash return of 1,400% on the portfolio. So it's done pretty well. But there's one common denominator, and that is I'm mostly B2B businesses. One common denominator, and that is that founders of B2B businesses have got this nasty habit of assuming that they build a better product and the market will come, and it doesn't. You've got to get out there and you've got to sell. And I've seen so many business startups with founders that get the product thing right. They get the technology thing. They get all the bits to actually go with it, but they ain't got any sales skills, and they don't know how to manage a salesperson. They don't know how to manage marketing people, right? And without that, you might capture your early adopter community, but you never get beyond the chasm into the mainstream, and that's what causes failure in most B2Bs. Sorry, we are digressing.
No, I see that, and it's a good digression. I see that a lot as well. And when you can't hire senior salespeople, and you have to be able to sell yourself to get out of the startup phase, and any founding team that doesn't have a sales capability, that only has engineering or product or another skill, is going to find life really hard. And I think that's an acute observation. So what was the best advice that you were given along the way? You've obviously given me a lot of advice that I've reshared with other people, and I might touch on some of that. But in terms of other people, other wise heads giving you advice, what have they said that stuck with you?
So I got very lucky. I've found, accidentally or otherwise, a series of mentors. And probably the best piece of advice that I ever had was say what you do and do what you say. And I think that's being able to marry communications with actions, and actions with communications is a really, really good skill, especially for an emergent CEO, or in fact any CEO, because you can't lead without being able to actually tie those two things together. I think that's probably the best piece of advice. One of the other pieces of advice was I was Chief Digital Officer for Thomas Cook between 2012 and 2014. And I badly suffered from imposter syndrome. And I just found myself there on this massive salary thinking, who the fuck am I to be able to do this? And my CEO at the time recognized that. And she said, what I want you to do is actually every time something good happens that you've been responsible for, take a screenshot of it, right? Because it's bound to be in the form of an email, some sort of visual recognition, and put it in a folder. And then every 6 months, go look at that folder and think, actually, I did that. And the next time you have a self-confidence back, just go back into that folder and just go and take a look. Because once you get enough of them, you actually start to realize that actually perhaps it wasn't luck. Perhaps there is some sort of innate skill there that I can bring to the party to be able to do it. So it was those two things. It was the personal development thing about acquiring that level of confidence and dealing with the imposter syndrome, and then being able that level of thing being able to actually marry together. The skill which I had, which I didn't have to learn, which I was very lucky about, and that was being able to actually present. And I think that's a really big skill as well. And a lot of people can't do it. And that's caused from a self-confidence thing. And actually, I talked to a lot of my startups actually about those presentation skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to capture an audience. And I built quite a large part of my career on actually doing public speaking around artificial intelligence and things like that. So that's not an acquired skill. That was one of the skills that I actually had. Everybody's got some skills. It's a question of actually finding the ones that you're not good at and then embellishing and enhancing those.
I've only ever known you as a brilliant presenter. Were you ever really average?
No, I wasn't. Probably because I've got a fairly unusual personality. I also probably because I'm a Yorkshireman as well. So therefore, I'm fairly good at stating what I see as being fact and not being shy about it. And most of the time I'm wrong, but there are occasions where I'm being very right. So no, for me, that's not really an issue. And I think it's a great startup skill as well, because it comes back to the selling thing, Matt. Is actually, in a startup, you've got to be able to project a vision. You've got to be able to project a product and stuff like that. So I've been lucky in that particular regard, but then I've had deficit in other areas. So each of us bring different skills to the party.
So it sounds like you're quite hard on yourself, and with things like imposter syndrome. And we know somebody called Lawrence John well.
Yeah.
And some of the best advice he gave me lots of advice over many years, actually. But one of the things that stuck with me is to celebrate the small victories along the journey, not just the sort of big seismic events.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't very good at celebrating those little milestones, and I think it is important that you do that.
Yeah, I think that there is that. If you go via take the big picture stuff, take the big delivery stuff, but actually it takes years to get to big delivery stuff. And if you don't slap yourself on the back, actually at little points during the way on the waypoints, and you don't recognize the waypoints, which is why you need the OKR scenario, because you need to be establish those waypoints so that you can actually slap yourself on the back, say, I've actually got to that particular point. Yeah. I think that is very good advice, because it gives a longitudinal view of where you are going and what you need to achieve at those waypoints. Yeah.
You mentioned the CEO of Thomas Cook, who you've worked for. Was that the best CEO you've worked for, or was there somebody better?
Yes, Harriet. I've got two really great CEOs. One was Harriet Green. Harriet, I worked for when she was chief executive of a big electronics distributor called Premier Farnell, and I met her back in 2000. She hired me as CDO for Thomas Cook back in 2012. And I regard her as she's a really great chief exec. There's a number of constituent parts on that. She was a great communicator. She was a great thinker about strategy. And she was as hard as nails. And I'm not as hard as nails. And when you're running that size of organization, you have no choice but to become as hard as nails. You have to stick with the script that you've created, because otherwise anarchy ensues and you make no progression in forward. In fact, you actually probably end up going bust. I think she was a great chief exec from that particular perspective. She went on to become the chairman of IBM Asia Pacific, where I went to work for her again. And she's recently, in the past couple of years, retired, because where do you go in your career after you become the chairman of IBM Asia Pacific? There is nowhere else to go. So she was terrific. The other guy that I think is a really great chief exec is I met a guy called Prad, and I met him. I used to be a board director of a BP subsidiary called Light, and he was the CTO. And he came out of that, and he had this idea for doing a startup. And I just instantly just got this guy. He had the brain the size of a planet. He's got a PhD in acoustics from Cambridge, right? I mean, come on, right? He's got the brain the size of a planet, but what he has He has an eye for practical dealing of detail, which I've never seen before. And that is a really powerful combination. That level of intellect and that practical dealing with detail is something else. So he and I spend an hour on the phone every week. So he gets the benefit of my age and experience, and I just get the benefit of actually talking to somebody who is possibly the brightest person I've ever met.
So you mentioned earlier that you wrote a book in 2014, I Disrupted. And obviously disruption was a big theme amongst your IBM and McKinsey work.
Yeah.
What did you see back then that's played out, and what did you think was going to play out that hasn't?
Sure. So the book was about the effect on technology on economic strategy. A lot of learnings here coming from The Economist. And I looked at a number of the technologies. So I looked at AI, I looked at Internet of Things, and I looked at, for example, digital printing of products. What's worked where I was way ahead of where I should have been, but turned out actually quite well. And it's one of the main reasons I think that McKinsey actually acquired me, is I had a vision around AI back in 2014, 2015, about what it was going to do to our economy, what it was going to do to employment, what it was going to do to marketing, accountancy, legal, all those things that actually come with that. And I think in the past year, and actually in the past month, that's actually going not necessarily beyond where I thought the functionality would be and the capability would be, but it's certainly gone beyond it in terms of timescale. And I'll give you an idea of that. When I first started looking at it, The Economist did some surveys back in 2016, 2017, I think it was, about when we would reach AGI, artificial general intelligence. And the consensus amongst the experts was 2066. They ran the same survey 3 years ago. The consensus had dropped down to 2035. And I'm going to secondary guess that actually, if you run a consensus now, it will be around 2027 to 2030. But the problem is, it's now accelerating beyond exponential rate. And we could see it in, I'd say, 26, 27. And forgive my grandstanding here, Matt. We're not ready. We're not even close to ready. There is no economic plan. There is no political plan. The economic planet is terrifying. I mean, there was an article in The Economist last week, it's a really good article, about how AI bots will start talking to each other. They already have. Bots start talking to each other? Hang on a minute, where are we in that conversation? We're not in that conversation. And we are looking down the barrels of swathes of white collar workers going in the net before 2030. Well, that's got implications because they are the biggest taxpayers. So where does the money coming from to actually run the country at that moment in time? As everybody reskills in the direction of becoming an electrician, a plumber, or a carpenter, which is the jobs that won't be replaced by AI anytime in the next 10 or 15 years or thereabouts. So that's my big political gripe at this moment in time. I do not see evidence of planning. The stuff that didn't come across, that didn't. I thought that additive manufacturing, in other words, 3D printing, was going to take over manufacturing, and everybody would be able to become a manufacturer in their garage. That hasn't worked out. The reason why it hasn't worked out is because not because of the devices to manufacture themselves, but because of the material science. In other words, we can print in plastic and plastic derivations, and that's only got limited use. That's very good for prototyping. It's not very good for mainstream manufacturing. When we get to the point of material science being able to print metal and metal variations, that's when I think it will change, where everybody will have a 3D printer in their home and they'll be able to take designs down from the internet for a new set of disc brakes for your bike or whatever it happens to be. That's when it will change. But that's probably a long time off. But then that's linked to AI, because AI is already doing material science and materials discovery. So that's going to get enhanced by everything. Everything comes back to AI.
So, I mean, obviously there's exponential growth in AI startups that are scaling to become really big businesses. Every function of the business that we can see is being impacted by AI. Therefore, we have an AI enablement team as well. What advice would you give small to medium-sized businesses? And I say that because the large corporates, the enterprise, can hire McKinsey, Bain, etc., to help them, support them. But if you can't afford really wise advice, and you're at the smaller end of the business spectrum, what advice would you give people with regards to AI and emerging technologies right now?
Yeah. Okay. The restriction here for most small to medium-sized businesses is they don't have the financial resource to be able to go higher ahead of AI and then look at using AI development or anything along those lines. AI will appear in those businesses in the form of applications built around existing packages like Microsoft Office, etc. And what will happen over a period of time is that those AIs will actually increase productivity of existing businesses, right? And that's going to happen naturally. The big thing, I think, for small businesses is to be able to actually look at where can we use AI to explore new markets, adjacent markets, part one. So in other words, if I'm a seller of, let's say, brake discs for bikes, right? How can I use AI to actually create a marketplace for selling brake pads and then braking handles for bikes? How do I use AI to understand the size of the marketplace, to understand product market fit, et cetera, et cetera? That's one part of it. The second part of it is looking at that productivity increase. The UK's got a really bad productivity problem, very explainable, but nevertheless really, really bad. But there are going to be, my view is that accountants, lawyers, surveyors, done. It's just a question of when, right? So therefore you need to start looking as a small business owner, when can that happen? And can I safely lose those people, or do I need to morph them into anything? But the biggest advice I would give here would be, as a small business, is form together a working group amongst your existing execs, right, and some external consultants about looking at AI. What can I exploit? Where are the opportunities? Where are the cost savings? And one really big thing is, and that is building into my business prompt engineering, right? And prompt engineering is the thing that's overlooked. Everybody uses AI really badly at this moment in time. They use it as an enhanced search engine because they don't know how to ask questions very effectively to optimize the answers and exploit the answers that you're actually getting out of AI. So one of the things that I'd actually do, well, two things I'd do. Firstly, every chief exec, every founder needs to actually go and spend a couple of hours, right, reading how to do prompt engineering, how to get the best out of AI, optimizing what they're doing with AI. The second point is actually form a working group to look at how you exploit it, how it looks for new markets, how you actually get into new markets, what those marketplaces, the marketing, the acquisition costs, all those actually bits to go with it, and actually bring in some external help. Small company consultants can actually help there a lot. You don't need a Bain, you don't need a McKinsey to be able to do it. You just need somebody that actually has got practical experience in what they're doing. So get a committee together. Okay, call it working party. I hate committees. I have to deal with committees at Moray Council, and that's suicidal. I'll be waiting till you do it in Spain, mate. So that's fundamentally the advice I would actually give, is do prompt engineering, learn to get the best of it, use it. So I was talking to a chief exec this morning. I'm supposed to be retired. It's just not working out like that. And I was talking to him this morning, and he'd been using ChatGPT, and I showed him some of the prompt stuff, and he went, "Oh my God." And then he started to use it himself, and he's getting instantaneous return on the intellectual stuff that he put into it.
I think a couple of points I'd probably add to that is there's an incredibly large number of free courses on prompt engineering that are available, that from Google and other parties that are really, really good. So I'd advise that everybody does those. And the other thing that I'm seeing when consulting is that there's a real need to not just embrace AI, but also to focus on what is uniquely human and what can be amplified by AI. So things like creativity and relationship building are two examples. AI can't take someone to lunch, cannot get on the phone and talk to people. It can't build those strength of relationships, and it rarely, it can have ideas, but that spark of creativity that humans have is unique.
And as you say, it's and I'll tell you a story about that, which an AI will never be able to replicate. And that was that Colette, and I were pitching for a piece of business from a very large American computer manufacturer for SEO back in NetRank days. And it was £250,000 worth of business, and we could not get them to move to actually sign a purchase order. So I went gangbusters in. I said, right, we're going to take 2 of them, and Colette and I are going to take them into for lunch in a 2-star Michelin a restaurant called La Gavroche in Mayfair, which now is closed down, unfortunately. And we took them out for this lunch. We took them in there at 12:30. We came out at 3, and I think it would be fair to say we were a bit pissed. And the bill, £500 for the food, which was all right, and £3,000 for the wine. 2 weeks later, we got the purchase order for £250,000. And you couldn't get an AI to be able to actually sit there after 2 bottles of wine and relate funny stories about the technology industry, because it just wouldn't work like that. So you're absolutely right. There are certain things you cannot replace and won't be replaceable. What our hope is that AI will make so much money for us that we can actually, as chief exec, spend most of our time every day at expensive lunches, just encouraging our clients to use our AI to get the maximum possible service. That is a utopian type environment, and I'm well up for it.
Oh, me too. And I think to your point around your stories, I get to talk to sales teams and leaders all the time, and that what appears old school, which is meeting people, talking to people, not hiding behind email, text, etc.
Yeah,
is normally those moments in time are normally responsible for the best deals a company has ever done. Yeah. They create friendships, and these people follow you around between companies. You do business with these people for a long time, and actually, if you can embrace those what we would call old school relationship building techniques, you can create a super powered sales team. So, again, merging the new, and there's lots of AI automations, sales processes that are coming through, but we shouldn't lose sight of the things that have worked for everybody in the past and continue to work, and they can be your advantage. So I think that's good advice, John.
And the final part about that is AI is an enhancer here. So one of the parts of functionality you get in your chat GPT, and I think Gemini at the moment, is their ability to remember the conversations you had with it. And that's really, really powerful stuff, because if you could go into a lunch, right, and have ChatGPT actually summarize all the conversations you've had with a client going back over 3 years, that is a relationship deepener and broadener, and that's super valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen a few bits of tech that are kind of listening and providing those prompts already for sales teams. So I think that is the future. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. That was a pleasure.
That was a pleasure. Thank you, Matt.